Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Riedman. I'm the creator of the K-12 School Shooting Database. And unfortunately, just as kids have gone back to school this fall, they have gone back to another school shooting, this time in rural Georgia. And as the details of this shooting come out, 48 hours now after the attack, we start to see the same sort of situation that has played out over and over again. And the situation that we see is a tragic death of teachers and students and injuries to others and psychological damage to every student in that entire community that's inflicted by a very young teenager, by a 14-year-old. And as everybody wants to point blame at that person and at that family, we need to look at this from a much broader perspective. Because for a 14-year-old to have an AR-15 rifle inside Appalachia High School, there's a societal failure to not take meaningful action over the last 60 years to make sure that this same type of attack doesn't happen over and over. There's an institutional failure when federal and state and local law enforcement agencies all had this teen and his father and this family on their radar, that they'd been interviewing them, that there were signs of a problem, that people were saying there's a problem, but there wasn't action. There's a community level failure where the norms that are instilled within people lead a teenager to think that violence is their only outlet. And that's a reflection of all the ways that they're socialized at the community level. There's a family level failure here where there's every single cry for help. There are text messages from other family members saying that this kid was begging for help for months. And ultimately, there's a child at the center of this. A 14-year-old is still a child. They're somebody that does not have agency. They cannot be in their own custody. They can't vote. They can't buy guns. They don't pay taxes. They are still a child. And that child has been failed by society, by institutions, by the community, by the schools, and by their family when that 14-year-old carries an AR-15 rifle into a school. And so for this episode, there's a person who is probably one of the best people in the country to talk about this situation, because Aaron Stark has been in that same place, but now he's a father, he's an advocate for mental health, and most importantly, he's an advocate for helping and giving love to the people in society that get the least of it, the people that are forgotten, the people that cry for help and think that violence is their only answer. So Aaron Stark, thank you for joining the Back to School Shootings podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into talking about Appalachia High School, can you just give a brief history of why you're here, how you got into this space?
First off, thanks for having me on. I'm a huge fan of your work. I've been following you for a long time. I got into this because I spent my life in abject abuse and horror. I grew up in a really abusive family that was drug addicted and violent and nomadic and bounced around the whole entire country. And that made me adapt in really toxic ways. And I became that toxic, aggressive. I was the monster as a teen. I felt like it. I felt like I was a nothing. And then I planned an attack. I planned on shooting up either my school or a mall because I had hit the point where I felt like I was completely invisible and I was screaming out into the void and nobody was hearing me. And I had tried multiple times to get myself help, and that was squashed. That was some of the most toxic times in my life. And when reaching out for help hurts you, you figure out some way to make people hear you. And that's what I did. So 1996, 1997, I was planning on shooting up North High School in Denver, Colorado. And simple kindness from a friend saved me. On when I was just about to commit the attack, I had someone who saw me as a person and not just as the monster I thought I was. And being treated like a person when you feel absolutely inhuman can change your entire world. And it changed mine. And so now I spend all the days that I can trying to help that kid in the dark find a way out and try to help people see that no one's born a monster. There's a path that you go down to get there. And you can, up until the moment of the attack, there's ways to step off, and you can get out of that haze of darkness. But
So,
if
so
you don't
let's take a
listen,
moment and just unpack your background a little more, because I think that
mm-hmm,
it's really important to understand how you could see yourself in the shoes of this 14-year-old school shooter
mm-hmm,
or other school shooters. So you were in a position where you were moving between schools, you're moving between houses, you had really abusive, drug addicted parents, and you felt forgotten by the system.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
that made you think your life had no value. That made you think about suicide, and ultimately, a
it
school
was.
shooting is a violent public suicide. But
Mm-hmm.
why a school shooting? Why is there that feeling to inflict pain on others as you're also experiencing that profound desire to die? Because I think people don't understand that.
Well, there was a point where, so for my story, to get into more detail with it, my family was, my birth to five, I was living with my father. That was like a Stephen King movie. It was just abject horror. He was the most violent and depraved individual I've ever met. And when my mom finally, I'm talking beatings and rapes and chased across the country being hunted, that kind of stuff. And when my mom finally left him, got with my stepdad, I spent the next 15, 20 years with him in my life. And that was crack cocaine and violence and crime and stealing and robbing and domestic violence every single day, constantly going from 0 to 100 every single day. And in that time, I'm moving back and forth across the country, going from Oregon to Colorado, bouncing from state to state, because it was late 80s, early 90s. And so it was really easy to create a whole new identity. You move up to another state, lie about your whole life, get a new job, get a new house, and 6 months later you lose all that. Wash, rinse, repeat. You're bouncing back and forth. So for me as a kid living in all that, it was the complete lack of any kind of stability, any kind of personal identity. Anything I had, all the material stuff I had would disappear. So I didn't have any, like, because we'd get evicted. So all the toys I had and stuff, I would have someone burst in my bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and throw a duffel bag at me, say, we need to grab all the stuff, we need to get out of here. And what choice do I have? The only thing I would ever take was my comic books, because I didn't have enough time to grab all the other stuff. And so nothing in my life had any kind of object permanence. It was, everything could be gone at a moment's notice. And at the same time, I am fat and smelly and dirty because I'm not taking care of myself. My family are crackheads, they're literal digging through the carpet looking for crack rock. I took crack to school for show and tell, to show one of the parallels with this kid screaming out for help. I took literal, it wasn't, I didn't take crack to school to show a teacher and be like, hey, help me. I took it to show and tell because it was a fun thing that was going on in my house. And that didn't only get ignored. When I got home, I got the crap kicked out of me because I did that. And nothing ever came of it. Like there was no response. And that started a pattern of me reaching out for help and reaching out for what I thought was the assistance, and not only getting crushed, but destroyed. Like I was the filthy kid that I was so filthy. One day a teacher brought a box of clothes for me at school. And the next day, because I brought home, I'd shown up super filthy the day before, like just stinking, reeking. I was absolutely the most filthy kid ever. I'd go into details, but that's not podcast appropriate. And then the next day, the teacher, I came into school and I had a box of school supplies, coat and pants and all this stuff, all these little cool things because they wanted to help. So I brought it home, and all that stuff got thrown away. I got the crap kicked out of me. We ended up moving because the teacher got too close. Like reaching out for help started getting even more toxic. And that's still 10, 11, 12 years old. 15 years old, I tried to go after spending at about 14 years old, I became homeless. Couldn't take it at home anymore with the crack cocaine. Started living on the streets, bouncing from friend's house to friend's house, and burning out relationships over that course because I am dirty and smelly and aggressive. And by this point, I'm insulting everybody around me, but myself most of all. I am very self-deprecating. I have more fat jokes than you have. When I would go to a new school, instead of you see, you know, when you go to see in a movie, you see people who like go up to the big tough guy and punch the big tough guy in the face to establish their pecking order. I'd kind of do the reverse of that when I would go to a new school. I'd go up to the most popular kid and I could find and insult myself to them to kind of like put myself exactly where I think I belong in the social pecking order. And that just the self degradation and the self depreciation, years of that, and living on the streets. And when I do go home, it's just crack and violence and hell. And so that spirals out to where now I'm self harming, start self harming when I'm 13, 14 years old. And I start cutting myself. That gets ridiculed by my family, like literally laughed at by my mom when she finds me cutting in my bedroom. And that just spirals me out even more. I end up completely on the streets, and I am come to a night where I'm in my friend's shed, which was my last place where I could stay because sometimes he would sneak me out dinner. His parents had a tool shed behind his house, and I had started spending the week at his house when I first started our friendship, and I could spend a week or two at his house because I was just a neighbor kid going through some stuff. And over the years, that got to be a couple days, and then that got to be a day. And by this point, now I can't even go to his house in the afternoon and sit on his couch because when I get up, his parents have to scrub the spot where I'm sitting because I'm so filthy. And so now I'm just kind of sleeping in his shed if I don't have anywhere else to be. And it's either that or living in this house where it's all a bunch of party teenager kids that I managed to find a way into. And it was the dad didn't live there, the dad didn't pay the rent, or the dad paid the rent, dad bought the food, dad didn't live there. So it was just teenagers living there. Dad lived with his girlfriend. So we all just hung out there and turned into this big party house. It was that house that was so toxic. I call it disaster groupies is what they were. It was like living vicariously through my darkness and trying to push me further out as far as they could to see how far I could go. And instead of talking about girls or sports or football and movies, we talk about mass murder. So if you're going to shoot up 10 people, how would you do it? And if you're going to shoot up a school, what would you do? And it's like, looking back, it was like a bunch of depressed kids navigating that without adult supervision, trying to figure out how to go through that haze. But at the time, that was just the reality of it. We were just living in that kind of darkness and spiraling out. But everybody else, they would have houses and they all got to go home and they all got to go do their thing. I didn't have anywhere to go. So when that house finally ended and this big party that we're having where everybody's tripping acid and doing drugs and parents show up, and of course parents get there, everybody evaporates, everybody has to go back home and nobody gets to stay at the house anymore. But I don't have a home to go to because my home is full of crack and drugs anyway. So I end up in that shed, in my friend's shed. And the night comes and I'm cutting myself so bad that there's a pool of blood forming on the ground beneath me. And I'm like, I got to get some help or I'm going to die. If I don't do something, I'm going to die. And so I got up in the morning and knocked on my friend's back door and borrowed bus fare and the phone book from his mom. And I called social services on myself. And I'm like, they tried to intervene a couple of times. There was one of the reasons why we moved. They were one of the reasons why I got beaten occasionally. And so I'm like, maybe they can help. And so they called me in and we have this meeting at social services and we sit around this table. And by the time I get there, it was dawn when I called, but it was like 3 or 4 in the afternoon when I got there. They also called my mom. They brought my mom in. So they have us sit at the table where there's social workers on one side, me and my mom on the other side. And they're like, so what are we here for? What's our problem? And I show them fresh bloody cuts on my arms. And I produce a box cutter razor blade and I throw it on the table, freshly covered in blood. And I'm like, that's what my problem is. I feel like I'm nothing. I feel like I'm going to die. I feel like I'm at the bottom. There's nothing left for me. And my mom, who was the most practiced liar I ever knew, she got them to believe that I was just making it all up, that I was just doing it for attention, that I just doing it for a rise. I do it all the time and she could handle it and it was going to be okay, which I find really ironic because yes, I was doing it for attention. Please see me. Someone see me screaming out in pain, but that wasn't how they took it. So they sent me home with her. And we get like a couple blocks away from the place and she turns to me and snarls and says, next time you should do a better job and I'll buy you the razor blades. And I'm like, okay, you think I'm a monster? I'll show you what that is now. Like up till that point, I'm kind of wrapping darkness around me like a blanket, and using it like a shield, like it would protect me. Like if the more toxic I get, the more bullyish I get, the more angry I get, that'll protect me from all the bullies themselves. Now I'm just diving straight into it. Like you want to see some monster? I'll show you what that is. So I went on a solid 9-month period of what I call scorched earth. where I was trying to destroy socially everything around me. I was offending everybody I could offend. If you liked me, I was trying to break that like. I was using the things that you liked the most and being toxic to that. I was being racist and misogynistic and toxic. And I wasn't racist, but if that was what made you mad, that's what I was going to do. Like it wasn't because I felt that way myself. My only goal was to make you angry. And so I was trying to make everybody around me hate me because I hated myself that much. I hated myself so much I needed the world to agree with me. And in that time,
so
I also
before we get into, your
yep.
that escalating to the point of planning mass violence,
Mm-hmm.
getting back to Georgia and getting
Yep.
to Appalachia High School, what we've heard from interviews and from family members and from other students and other people in the community, and it's really important to note right now that there's very little official information that has come out, but there are family members that have spoken to the media, people have been interviewed, and there's this common theme that this teenager was begging for help, that he had called the FBI to make a tip about himself, that he was trying to reach out to social services, that his grandmother, who was in another community, had contacted the school and gone to the school. But it sounds very similar to your story in that he was moving from house to house. He was in a really chaotic relationship with his father and mother, and they had a very chaotic relationship. What does that do to kind of your psyche as you're a young teenager? And then he arrives at this school, and you talk about creating a new identity, that
Mm-hmm.
he'd only been at this school for a couple days. And so none of his education records from the previous schools, none of the information about other threats
Yeah.
had followed him and been transferred. So what's that like to both not have your own kind of identity, but also to be this new person in these new places?
It is depersonalizing is too small of a word. It like the way I think of it is when I was going through it myself, I had to reestablish everything about myself every single time. And I only had a couple things that I even thought were myself. Like I could barely even grasp on to anything because when you're living in abject hell, it's I personally think that we're all taught languages of aggression and violence and a vocabulary of how to use it. And when everybody around you is abusive and then you reach out for the help and your hand is not only smacked down but crushed, like that, it turns to a point where you feel so invisible that everybody needs to hear you scream. And I want to preface this when I talk about this because when I talk about it, I talk about it in very blunt terms. I do not say this at all to excuse or to justify any of these actions. I am not saying that it is morally justifiable or correct to commit any of these attacks. That is not. I'm not saying this at all. My goal with this is to show the path that happens with this. This is the path of darkness that you go down, not to excuse it, simply to illuminate it so that maybe we can help stop it the next time.
And that's, a common theme that comes out over and over, where politicians will say, this is not the time to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
The wounds the wounds, physical and emotional, are too fresh. There's a thought in society that we need to other any of
Mm-hmm.
the offenders. And once you put somebody in the box of being a monster, of being deranged, of using terms like psycho, you're saying that this is somebody who's so different from a person that we should never discuss, we should never name.
Yeah.
But when you don't do any of that, when you turn somebody into a monster, you never learn the lessons from what got them to that point. And I think one of the most important things that you've said is it's a 14-year-old kid until the second that kid pulls the trigger.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And every single moment before that was a failure in society, in the institutions, in the community, in the family, in the school itself. And they're not a bad person until the second they pull that trigger. But what pushes somebody over the edge there? And I think what's really interesting in this case is he's brand new at the school. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't know the teachers. He doesn't know the classmates. He doesn't have a long list of grievances. Why commit violence against them?
and even on a more granular level, and I might be off on this again because of the spotty reporting, but the reporting as far as it sounds now is that the shots themselves weren't even targeted, that he was kind of shooting randomly and going around, and that really speaks out to me that that's a scream that this is somebody is going to finally hear me. I've tried to get some help here. You said you were going to help, and you hurt me. And that is a fundamental equation that when you are depressed, when you are the kid in the dark, that is an equation you have to evaluate everybody with. Does this help or does this help hurt? And if this help hurts, then I'm not going to do it. And because 90% of the time when people say they're going to help you, they're going to hurt you. And you lose, I call it boiling away your humanity. The humanity boils away and refines down, and you lose the ability to have things like positive connections and things like a place where you actually matter and things like a grounding foundation for anything that you are. When you yourself become so ephemeral that you can be blown away in the wind, then what really are you? Like if all you have, you have to look at it when I say that people nobody is a monster all the way. Nobody started in the pitch black. You have to start somewhere. Even the worst of us, even the absolute worst of the worst. Jeffrey Dahmer was at one time a baby that was being tickled and giggled. That was the truth. There was a time when that was a happy kid. Okay? Even for just 5 minutes. That is a true statement. And if we think that everybody is a monster right away, that's the easiest way to make them not us, to make them not me. And we want to put a label, and we do the same thing both on the response to it when we look at the kid and the response from the police. We want to have a villain and we want to have a monster. We want to make someone the bad guy, and we want to make that bad guy different from us, because the more they can be different from us, the more it's not our fault. And when it comes to something like the response from the FBI, we'll probably get into that later, but they had to hit their own red lines with this. We put them restrictions on it, and then we call the kid monster so that we can see that maybe this abuse is something special. Maybe it's something different. When I guarantee you, anybody that's listening to this, you probably have 10 people like me in your life, and you probably know at least 100 of me. There's a lot of kids out there like this that are screaming out in pain, and they're this big gray area that I always say there's a small sliver of people that are really going to go through with the attack, that are going to pull the trigger. But there's a gigantic gray area of people that think that they could, should, or might. And those are the ones that we really can reach. And up until that moment you pull the trigger, you're a person screaming out in pain. You're a person screaming out you are a person in pain. Yeah, and you are living this life trying to deal with existence without a roadmap. Nobody has a manual. All we have is the examples of the people that are around us. But when those examples are abjectly horrible, and you try to reach out to the people that are the help, quote unquote, and that not only is horrible, but destroys you. Because think about it. You're the 14-year-old kid, and you're bouncing from school to school. Nobody knows who you are every time. Like you said, the school records. My school records never transferred with me. I never had a me. And then so I had to decide who I was every time. But I think I'm horrible. I'm nothing. I'm a piece of crap. Because when I go home, I'm beaten and I'm thrown in the corner, and people tell me I'm worthless, and I get nothing. My life is just not even worth the paper it's printed on. And you're going to ask me to reevaluate my identity every time? And last time I tried to go get help with maybe at a school he went to, maybe they quashed him last time. I went to so many schools where the counselors would say, "Oh, we have this whole system to support we have." I want the schools to realize that the people who are doing these threat assessment teams for the schools, that when you're laying out what you think is a menu of assistance, and you have the team of counselors, and you have the TAs, and you have all these different programs, and you have these different systems, that is not a menu of assistance to that kid in the dark. That is a list of landmines to navigate around, because that teacher lied to me, and that teacher molested me, and this teacher is going to turn me into my parents, and that counselor is completely full of crap, and they're all going to turn me into the authorities. So that's a group of landmines that you bounce around, and that's how you end up with the one teacher's assistant in the choir room that knows everything, and all the teachers and all the threat assessment team has zero clue of what's going on. And when they bring that kid in the dark into the counseling office, when you're the kid going to get help, that is like walking into a room full of spikes that are pointed at you. Because let's say you are that 13-year-old kid now, okay? Let's say he's back a year ago. This is a hypothetical. This is not going off details of the case. This is just mainly details of my own life. Okay. Let's say you're a 13-year-old kid, you're going out to go get help. You've tried to get help before, and that went to nowhere. All right. So the next time you go in to go get counseling, you know that person across from you has mandatory reporting lines. And those mandatory reporting lines can blow up your entire life. And let's say that you have siblings. Your brother goes to foster care, your sister goes to foster care, your parents go to jail, all because you tried to get help.
Yeah.
And your whole life, help was the reason why you moved. And help was the reason why you got the crap kicked out of you. And help was the reason why you hurt yourself. So
So I
it,
want
this
to
other,
pause on that for a minute and get into a really important policy topic that gets overlooked here is, now you've spent all of this time detailing this highly personal individual experience where a kid is suffering at home, a kid is suffering in the community, a kid is being overlooked in school. Each one of these pieces where something being reported to a parent turns into getting beaten, something being reported to social services means you're going to move. These are all individual experiences that are creating grievances, that are creating anger
mm-hmm,
towards the system. What they are not is terrorism.
mm-hmm,
Terrorism is something completely different. And it's what I
mm-hmm,
studied in my graduate education. And terrorism is about a group that has a shared ideology where they feel that our group is being disenfranchised or oppressed or not represented in society. And we as a group are going to take action. And when
mm-hmm,
we're a small insurgency, the way that we're going to take action is through grand public displays. We're going to blow up a
mm-hmm,
cafe. That is the way that a group that feels disenfranchised can exert an extraordinary amount of influence over striking fear into the civilian population. And people have studied terrorism for 50 years, and soft targets are this term that comes up. And that's because a
mm-hmm,
terrorist group wants to have the greatest chance of success in their attack. So they're going to target the place that has the best chance of hurting as many people as possible. It
mm-hmm,
has nothing to do with that place representing trauma to the individual people. And politicians have been all over the news in the last 2 days saying, our schools are soft targets. Our schools are soft targets. If we just harden them,
no,
then we're going to stop a psychopath from coming here. And this
no,
is this fundamental problem where we're taking things from 9/11, we're taking things from terrorism studies, and we're applying them to schools.
yeah, yeah,
Schools
and
are not soft targets in the
no,
sense
and
that lack of security makes a kid motivated to shoot up the school.
no, and in fact, so two points on that. First off, from personal experience, the soft target thing, and again, parallel with this story, there were SROs and multiple police officers in the school at the time of the shooting. At my school, when I was going to attack, there were multiple armed police officers stationed at the doors. The other option for my attack was also a mall because mine was based on the time of day I was going to get my weapon. If daytime, go to the school, nighttime, go to the mall. Mine was a scream out in pain. Both those places were close by, had personal connections and that kind of thing. And neither ones were what you consider soft target. There was a police station a couple doors down from the food court in the mall. It was, to me, and looking at, again, I'm kind of still an outsider to the field. I'm a regular person. I worked at a gas station. I'm just trying to do this because I feel like I need to. So looking at the data, I don't have the data that you do. So if I'm incorrect, correct me on this. But it really appears that the lion's share, if not almost all, of these school shooters it is a
A
not
current or former
necessarily
student
a
with a
current or former
direct
student.
connection.
And not, I wouldn't even necessarily say connected with a direct victim, but the place connection. The victim connection I think is off base, but the place connection is definitely always there. And the hardness of the target isn't factored in as a negative. It's factored in as a positive to a lot of these things because that means you're going to die in the attack. And the all it does if you harden the school is change the place that it attacks. If you lower it down to one door, then that just means they shoot that one door. If these kids, you trying to institute a hardening of the system with the kid who's in the system, how are you going to do that? How are you going to harden the school from someone who's inside the school and you're giving the plan to, and you're telling exactly what the escape routes are because they have to be part of this planning? How are you going
And
to do this?
you're teaching them from kindergarten that if you want to have power and influence and be noticed and have an impact on the entire
Mm-hmm.
school system, you prepare and rehearse for an active shooter
Yeah,
from kindergarten.
from
That
kindergarten.
the thing that every person is going to be scared of, the thing that every person is going to experience pain from
And
in this school, I can be that.
but the thing I want the adults to remember is the other side of this equation is isolation. And one of the fundamental things that these kids are hitting is lack of connection and personal isolation. And when you are the worst of the worst criminal, if you are in Guantanamo Bay and you commit a crime in there, what do they punish you with? Solitary. They put you by yourself because being by yourself is the worst punishment we have. There isn't anything worse besides physical torture, and we don't do that. We put our criminals all by yourself. And if isolation is what we punish the worst of our criminals with, what is it like when you're a 13-year-old kid who's fully isolated from everybody, including all the help that's around, who looks at you like you're just an assignment? Because it's equally depersonalizing to be a monster and to be a project. If when I was going to school, people were either afraid of me or they wanted to fix me. Neither one of those was me. That wasn't a person. If I'm a checklist in your checkbook, then that's not a person. And that, I think, is fundamentally one of the problems that the helpers and the administrators have, is that, yes, I know you're dealing with it at scale, but if you're just going to harden the targets and then all these rules that the police people have. I've had the opportunity now to speak at multiple law enforcement conferences across the country to federal law enforcement officers going all the way up to the top of the federal government. And the thing that these people have is you can restrict all of the you can put all the bars on the doors, you can put all the bars on the windows, you can put all the restrictions on the entryways, and you're going to get the same impact you get at a one pizza party. Because what these people want to figure out is how do you actually connect with that kid? How do you, the thing they want from me at those conferences isn't details about the shooting. It's how do you connect with a person? How do you actually figure out how to talk to that kid in the dark and see them there? Which kind of gives me hope for where the field goes, but that's a separate portion. But the, I it's such a deep, complex issue. Everybody wants to have this panacea again, where you want to fix it all. You want to be able to solve it because everybody, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But if you don't make small incremental steps and do one movement here and then one movement there and the next movement the next time, you're never going to get anywhere. And you're dealing with somebody on the opposite end, as the end user of the product, as the kid in the dark. What their internal math is when they're encountering the help is they're going to test you. So you're going to encounter that kid who's going to be lashing out, who's going to be wilding out and toxic. And that is a defense mechanism, and it's on purpose a lot of times because you'll test and the best way to describe it is you'll come up to somebody and you'll say, okay, you can take me out of 2. All right, that's fine. You can take me out of 2. How about out of 4? Can you take me out of 4? All right, you can handle it at 4. How about out of 8? Can you take me out of 8? Because I live at 10. 10 is my daily life. That's where I exist. Can you take me out of 8? Because if you leave at 8, then don't even try. Don't even exist. How about a 12? Can you take me out of 12? All right. How about can you 12 tomorrow? Can you take me out of 12 tomorrow? Because if you waffle again at a 12 tomorrow, then you're not there. You can't do it. It's going to take repeated efforts at that high level. And then slowly they'll lower it back down, and then you'll go back to a 2, go back to a 3. Then eventually they'll bring their friends to you because you're the trusted person. But if you leave at a 7 and you said that you're the help, I'm not even going to try. Because again, I live at 10. My daily life is abject horror. So if you're going to take off, do it now.
Yeah, and that's an important point because that's not what the behavioral threat assessment team model is built around.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a social services model is built around. That's what
Mm-hmm.
child services is supposed to do, is identify when a kid is having a worse environment at home than they could have elsewhere, even if there are
Mm-hmm.
problems with foster care, even if there are problems with group homes, even if there are problems with all sorts of temporary living situations. Social services is looking at the totality of your life and saying what you have is so bad that we're going to put you into another place. And this all connects back to terrorism because where did the behavioral threat assessment model came from? It came from the Secret Service.
Mm-hmm.
The Secret Service was tasked after Columbine with creating this model for how to assess threats at schools. And they took their model for identifying if somebody was going to potentially assassinate a political figure. That has nothing to do with that person's social well-being. It's
Mm-mm.
only does this person have motivation, planning, and capability to harm a public official? And when you take that same mentality into creating this threat assessment process in schools, that team, which I've been involved in the training of, is looking for these things. Does this person have intent?
Mm-hmm.
Have they taken steps towards planning? And do they have access to weapons? That team doesn't care about, is this kid being beaten by their family every day? Is this
Mm-hmm.
kid moving all of the time? It's exclusively, is this kid going to shoot up the school? And
Well,
that is such a limited way to look at things,
mm-hmm.
because the kid who might not have the intent or capability or planning, but is in a terrible situation, a year from now might be driven to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're missing that. We're
Yeah.
missing the whole picture of the person.
Yeah, the pathway to violence, I think, needs to be slightly extended into more personal areas. It does give me hope that when I do go speak at these conferences, that does seem to be where a lot of the law enforcement urge wants to go now, is to try to look at the wellness model and adapt the looking at things like PERMA, which I'm going to get the acronym wrong, so forgive me, but it's like personal personal achievements, mattering, meaning, belonging, relationships, accomplishments, and that when you have those kinds of things, you if you can fundamentally feel like you're valued and you add value to somebody else, that's a fundamental key. When you lack that feeling of belonging and feeling of value, the downward slide is absolutely horrible. And if we when we're looking at threat assessment again, people look at it, it's the hitting of those confluence of events. Not only do people want to have a panacea, but then we have the adults who have indemnified themselves out of effectiveness, who have put up so many rules and so many restrictions and so many things to protect against liability and responsibility and protect against accountability for what might happen, that if that kid goes into that counseling office and is honest with that counselor and tries to give an honest assessment of themselves, there is a high probability that that help is not going to be help. It's going to destroy all their life. And even though that's objectively considered help, quote unquote, because you're going to have the authorities involved, and now you're going to have everybody put into their proper care because of social services or whatever, to the kid, that's the only hell they have. That's the only life that they have. And you lose that granular bit. And so the connection is, again, I think the most important piece of this entire puzzle. The thing that stopped me wasn't social services and the police and involvement with authorities. It was going to a friend's house and actually being seen as a kid in pain and crying and having that personal connection at a time when I felt that I was absolutely nothing. And I think that we have a large amount of kids these days who are really craving connection. And on your earlier terrorism point, I do think that we're hitting a public spot right now where we're kind of hitting a confluence of that as a phenomenon, because one of the biggest opponents that I face in this is what I call the negative social economy, which is the it looks like to the outsider like the Reddit forums and the incel subgroups and the YouTube chat rooms and the X and all these different islands of negativity, when in reality that is an interconnected web of subculture with its own risk reward system, its own celebrity system, its own adulation and accolation system, all of these built into it. So the kid who's crying out and craving these kinds of attention and belonging and connection are finding it in an extremely toxic area where the let's take the opposite of somebody like me. I came out with my story. I wrote a post on Facebook, changed my life. I did a TED talk that really changed my life. Now I get to do cool things like sit on a podcast with you and dissect this stuff intellectually. Yay, that's fun. Let's take the opposite of that. Let's say that you're a kid who is harassing an abortion clinic so much they close their doors. Okay, you do this, and then there's certain subgroups online that are going to give you tips on how to do it better. If you do it better, they're going to give you rewards and say you did it great. If you do it good enough till you get public attention, they're going to give you the adulation and celebrity and the public adulation. Oh, you did it wonderfully. And if you do it good enough to where you're in the public a lot, you become an icon. You get to have the full superstar status over there. Okay, so you're getting all of the public things that people want in the regular world, because I really believe at the heart of it, all of us want to be held and told that we're okay. And you're going to get that by someone saying you're going to be okay, but to be okay, that guy has to hurt and that guy has to pay for it. And that's where that blending of the line of terrorism, I think, comes in, because then you do have some groups that are directed toxic subgroups that are lashing out and being and in that purposeful way. I personally see it in the video game debate, because I think that people are looking at the completely opposite place for when it comes to danger with video games. Because they're talking, it just came on the news yesterday. It's another politician blaming this on violent video games. It's all about shooter games. I'm a gamer myself. I'm involved in this culture. Okay, I play games all the time, and violent video games are not the problem. It is not shooter games that are the issue. It is not having guns in the video games that is going to be the problem at all. It's the social networks that the games percolate that are the issue.
What is your one takeaway that you wish every school and every parent and every local police department would know when they hear this public report or a threat that this kid is thinking about shooting up the school? What is the one action that you wish that they would take right in that moment?
Listen to the kids for what can help them, because I see the police have ideas for what to do, and the counselors have ideas for what to do, and the schools have ideas for what to do, and they all involve restricting the students in some way and limiting what they have access to and limiting what they can do. And the students have all, like I said, all the information in the world at their fingertips, and they're fact checking everybody in real time, and they know who they can help and who they can't help and who is the help and who isn't. So ask them. It's the biggest untapped resource we have, is to actually ask the kids, how can we help you? And listen to them when they tell you, and give them the respect that they've lived their entire lives and all their emotions. And when we give love to the ones that we feel deserve it the least because they need it the most, sometimes that might mean somebody that you dismiss because they're lesser than you.
Oh, that's such a powerful point. And, getting back to where we started, it's about the people in society that we think deserve the least amount of help, the people that are left behind, the people that are moving, the people that are in these abusive houses, the kid who is quiet in class because they're scared to say anything in their brand new school. Those are the kids that are hurting, and they're the ones that need to be noticed. And the people that you don't think are worth anything, a tiny investment into them can completely change their life. A tiny act of kindness for you completely changed your life. And if we can just find ways to recognize people that are hurting, a kid who's planning to shoot up the school, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of this week or this month or this year. It's something that their entire life has been a series of failures by
if a 13-year-old is calling the FBI on himself, listen to that.
Yes. Yeah. And if somebody is asking for help in those ways, they don't need everything. They just need a tiny piece. The entire concept of crisis intervention is about every single person can make a tiny action to have somebody feel noticed, to let somebody know, I'm here for you in this moment. And from there, you can escalate it upwards to get somebody in touch with an authority figure, with a social service. But each of us need to recognize somebody in pain. Somebody who's thinking about violence towards others has first thought about violence towards themselves. To think about violence towards themselves, they need to feel like their life has no value. And what we need to do to stop school shootings is make every single kid, every single place of the country, they don't need a fortified door in the classroom. They need to know that a door is open where they can get help. So, Aaron, I want to thank you so much today. This was another episode of the Back to School Shooting Podcast. Aaron, where can people find you?
Can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm on X, AaronstarkAuthor.com. I'm not .com. Aaron at AaronstarkAuthor at gmail.com is my email. And then, just come find me. I'm a public speaker, so if anybody wants a presenter or speaker at their conference or at their place, come contact me. I do that all over, and I just try to help as many people as I possibly can, not turn into me.
I'll have your info in the show notes, and thank you so much for talking about this today.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor. Thanks for having me.